Mr. Steele, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Mr. Brooks?
I'm doing great. So, welcome to the podcast. We'll start off with a little bit of light bio information on you, such as where you were, which city and state were you born and raised in?
Okay, I am an Army brat.
Okay.
And at the time I was born in Tokyo, Japan.
Okay.
1951 during the U.S. Army occupation.
Okay.
One of the things I take pride in is that at the time I was born, my father was in Korea, fighting in the Korean War, and his commanding officer, when the word got out that I had been born, said to my father, I think your wife can use you a whole lot more than I can. You head back to Japan.
Wow.
so I got him out of the war.
So did he have to return to Korea after that, or was that it for his career?
No.
Really? Okay.
That was it. And actually, 3 months after I was born, I guess, we headed back to the States.
Wow. Okay. All right. So
another little interesting tidbit is that we came back in 1952. That was a leap year. So February has 29 days in a leap year.
That it does.
The ship that I was on crossed the international date line from the 29th of February into the 28th of February.
Yes, that's true. That is how that works.
So in fact, I had 30 days in my first February.
That's interesting.
Because I had the 29th twice.
Okay. That is an interesting bit of extra information.
That is really pertinent to not much of anything.
Well, actually, I can say that means that that makes you one day older than everyone else your age.
Well, and I sometimes take a 2-day birthday. I will say, it's my birthday in Japan, and that's where I was born, so I should celebrate that, and then have the second birthday when it's my birthday here.
Okay, all right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so when you came to the States with your family in 1952, were you still moving around because your father was active duty?
Yes, he was active. He finally retired in 1961, I believe it was.
Oh, so you were about 10 years old. Okay.
So we spent, we spent time in Milwaukee and in Denver. He's a Denver native.
Oh, Denver, Colorado. Okay.
And so it's the Denver area that I live in now.
Okay.
But we spent time in Germany, and eventually in 1959, he was posted back here to Denver, and then he retired.
Okay. So, all right.
Traveled around a little bit, but not as much as an awful lot of Army brats.
Mm-hmm. So, did you remain in the Denver area from then until, because you say you still now reside in that Denver area?
Yes.
Okay.
I've lived here all straight through.
Okay. All right.
I went to college here in the Denver area, had a brief foray into political life, and ran for office, and lost.
Okay.
And after I lost, thinking I was sure I was going to win this, be a state senator. do I do with my life now? And went back to graduate school and got a degree in history.
Oh, okay. So you are a historian. Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I knew too many historians that were out of work or were underemployed. But I had an opportunity for an administrative job at a local community college.
Okay.
And that was full-time, so I took that.
Okay.
And basically had a career in facilities management at the college. And just a year or so short of my retirement, had an opportunity to start doing some part-time teaching.
Okay.
So then, after I retired, I was still a part-time teacher, but taught Colorado history and United States history.
Okay.
As far as my interest in genealogy, my mother always had an interest in it, but I was pretty much uninterested until our oldest daughter was told to draw a family tree for one of her, I think it was her third grade class.
Okay.
And I can't draw for save my soul. And I figured there must be a computer program that would help me with this.
Okay.
So I went out and found a computer program, Family Tree Maker, which I still use, and began putting together the family tree as I knew it from my mom for my daughter's third grade project. It just grew from there and is sort of grown like Topsy. It doesn't seem to end.
So I'm curious to know, because all of us, I think, the majority of us who have this interest in our own family history, there were moments that were kind of like sparks for us, and it kind of like set us on this quest to find out things. So when you were doing that family tree with your daughter, was that kind of like a moment that really sticks out in your mind, and when you say, wow, I'm finding out things that I never knew by doing this?
Absolutely. There were family myths that have since been put to rest. I had a great aunt who was absolutely convinced that we were descended from Alexander Hamilton.
Oh, okay.
And the answer to that is no. On my mother's side, she had relatives that she could trace back to right around 1800 in upstate New York. So that was kind of interesting, and she had a number of artifacts left over from that.
Such as, could you? Okay.
Sure. In 1802, the New York State Legislature passed a law requiring that every county in the state of New York would maintain an official collection of weights and measures. So that if you were buying a pound of nails, you could judge that pound against the official county weight. That a county inspector would come through the various stores and test the scales to make sure that they were accurate. For example. Well, one of the things that my family came across, and it's sitting here on the top of my bookshelf, is the official brass yard, which is a yardstick made out of brass for Saratoga County, New York. And I don't know who had the sticky fingers.
Because that was supposed to have stayed in Saratoga, I assume.
It should have.
Okay.
And I don't know. At this point, I have a child who is interested in keeping that, so it will probably go to them, and
be passed down in the family.
Right, and my guess is they're probably not going to have children. So at that point, my guess would be that it'll end up back in Saratoga.
Okay. Mhm.
She went to school in nearby Vermont and had to do a family history for one of her classes.
Now you're talking about your mother, right?
Yes, this is my daughter, my oldest daughter. And so she was doing her grandmother's history, and we had a copy. We had the original charter for the local school. We sent that back to her. She gave that to the local historical society as a way of saying, yes, I do have roots in your community, and here's something that probably belongs in your collection.
I'm sure they appreciated her doing that.
Yeah. And they, at that point, were very helpful to her with her research.
Good. Interesting.
So it's some of those kinds of things that have spurred my interest.
So I take it that your mother, she must have had an interest herself as well to hold on to the things that she held on to for as long as she did.
She did.
Mm-hmm.
And she lost her father at a very young age. She was 12.
Okay.
Her mother went into service, working for a wealthy family.
Okay.
So she ended up floating from one family to another, sort of 1930s couch surfing, if you will, living with various different families throughout most of her junior high and high school years.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So home and possessions were very important to her.
Okay. I can understand that.
That brings, understanding to a whole lot of things, basically throughout her whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the same kinds of things, I think, with other people who were children of the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Safety and security, financial security, are very, very important because they were perhaps witness to significant loss of basic needs.
That seems to ring true in my family as well, because when I hear that my relatives that grew up during that time, they seem to have more of an appreciation of stability and not having to worry about things the way they probably had to when they were growing up.
Right.
Due to uncertainty and all of that.
Well, and my mother did not have a house that she could call her own until several years after I was born, that she and my father bought their first home.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And when they bought their second house, she stipulated a number of years later that she would never move out of that house. She would never go to a nursing home. She would never go to assisted living or anything. And that I was not to do anything to that home. And it was because she had never had one, and by heavens, she was not going to give up. She was never going to be, quote, homeless again.
Okay.
And homeless simply meant, in her view, not owning her own home.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it sounds to me like the things that she experienced in her younger age stayed with her, and made an impression on her that was very strong.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. So now, at some point, I looked at your page. Looks like you've been on Facebook for a while. There's not a lot of people our age who are members of Facebook. in addition to that, you proceeded to join the genealogy group on Facebook. So how did all of that come about?
I know that at some point, some post from the genealogy group showed up in my timeline. I looked at it, I read it, and I saw that it seemed to be a group that was willing to help others break through various walls.
Okay.
And thought, okay, this is something that's worthy to follow up on. And so I requested membership and have sort of followed them, although not posting an awful lot over the years.
Right.
I do follow the threads and try to be helpful where I can.
I understand what you mean, because I'm a fellow member of Facebook. If I don't post a lot, sometimes I'll get things that are put on my timeline that I don't necessarily go out and request. So that may have been what happened to you. Maybe you didn't seek out the genealogy group. Maybe it just ended up on your timeline. It sounds to me like that's kind of like what happened, and then it sparked an interest, so you just followed through from there.
That's correct.
Okay, so I'd like to mention a little bit about how you and I met, because my interest has always been in African American genealogy. I belong to the regular genealogy as well, which I go on from time to time. So I was scanning through different posts, and I came across your post, and that was from February 20th of this year. And so what I'm going to do, because not everyone who's going to hear this podcast belongs to that and has free access to your post, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. It said, ownership of enslaved people was common throughout the colonies. I have Quaker ancestors who owned slaves, even though the Society of Friends, and you have quotes, not quotes, but in parentheses, Quakers, were opposed to the institution of slavery. Many of the founding fathers were slave owners, and many took them as servants while fighting in the Revolutionary War. So as a person who's interested in African American genealogy, this really caught my attention. Also, I'll also mention to listeners that it created several responses in the form of comments. Did you want to talk a little bit about what inspired you to create that post?
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, I taught U.S. history for at least several years, and the college at which I taught had a very diverse student body. We had a number of African Americans. We also had a number of Africans.
Okay, from the continent.
Who don't always have an appreciation for some of the African American experience.
Understandable.
We had Asians, we had Hispanic students. Part of that teaching experience in terms of the early American history certainly involved the institution of slavery and how that developed and up through in the period that I taught ended basically with the end of the Civil War. So emancipation. One of the things I made it a point to at least illustrate the fact that, yes, there were slaves in the northern states, although not to the extent that it happened in the agricultural South.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned in the post, I have a number of ancestors, a big piece of my family tree has Quaker roots, and the Quakers were among the first that became outspoken against slavery.
Yes, I've seen that in my readings as well.
Right, and I have a line that I haven't actually tied. I haven't been able to nail it down yet, but and a person who may be in my family tree, who was an author of one of the very first resolutions by the Friends in Pennsylvania, coming out with abolitionist sentiments. And I keep trying to make that connection because I think that would be kind of cool. But going back to the teaching for just a moment, one of the things that I tried to do in every course that I taught was do at least one class session about genealogy. The reason being that for an awful lot of students, history is just boring names and dates. Mm-hmm. And they don't see how it relates to them. And once I get them thinking about their own parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and the things and events that they participated in or saw, all of a sudden history becomes a little bit more approachable and interesting. One of the things I found really fun was after Ancestry DNA came out and I had my DNA tested, one of the things that came up was an ethnicity showing 2% African DNA.
That's interesting.
And I have seen things where it suggests, and I don't buy this, but I think it's overly simplistic, but it suggests that 2% of any ethnicity means that there was a full-blooded person with that ethnic or racial background 5 or 6 generations back.
Okay.
I have not been able to come up with that in any way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem to fit. And I don't necessarily buy that argument.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always fun when I was talking about genealogy in some of these diverse settings to explain and put up a slide on the show, on the screen showing my ethnic background and saying, and there, see that 2%? The white guy's got 2% African blood.
Mm.
And there were always snickers and laughs. And at that point, to a certain extent, a change in the way they looked at some of this stuff.
Mm.
So, given all of that, it was earlier this year, going through some records of wills, that I first noticed an abstract of a will in New Jersey that one of my ancestors had. The will mentioned 2 Negroes among his assets. Okay, that's very interesting.
So did you make the connection that he was part of the Quakers, or is that just an assumption that you made?
No, he is part of a very long line of Quakers.
Okay.
And his great-grandfather, I guess? Yeah, his great-grandfather, his grandfather came over to this country on one of the first ships that William Penn sent over to colonize.
Okay.
And the family remained Quakers for another several generations.
So
one of the questions that came up was, is there a way that I can demonstrate or make clear to people that are looking at my family tree on Ancestry that this person owned a slave, or more, in this case two. And part of that came from, as I mentioned to you, I think earlier, my wife and I are regular watchers of Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s Finding Your Roots television program on PBS.
Right.
And he often discusses the difficulty of African Americans being able to trace their ancestry beyond the Emancipation Proclamation, moving backwards.
Right.
Because, again, until 1850, even the first names of slaves didn't show up in census records. So I don't know if anything that I'm going to do is going to help someone with their individual search, but I felt that by putting some sort of an image into an ancestor's gallery, at least it might provide some sort of assistance to someone somewhere down the road.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I also wanted to do, and at this point I found 3 ancestors. I have come up with 3 that show slave ownership. All 3 Quakers.
Oh, really? Okay.
All 3 in New Jersey.
What part of New Jersey did you have any idea?
I've got one in Burlington.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Let's see, the Bucks. Deerfield in Cumberland County, New Jersey.
Okay.
Is another one.
And
let's see, his father was born in Wethersfield, Connecticut, and then moved to Fairfield, New Jersey. And they were the other 2.
Okay. So did you get this from the Ancestry.com website? Was that the one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And in doing a search on these individuals, I look for wills. And in each of these cases, New Jersey provides an abstract of the wills, which is just a brief paragraph saying who the descendants of the deceased person were, and a brief description of the property that they were leaving.
Okay.
I've noticed, and I've been really frustrated the last few days trying to prepare for this, that there is a link in Ancestry to the actual wills that doesn't want to work.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because I would be interested in seeing who these enslaved persons were willed to.
Okay.
So that I could try to follow their.
Yeah, you can follow the breadcrumbs on that one.
Right. And at this point, the link doesn't want to work. But I think, again, I look at it as I am at least providing a couple of breadcrumbs.
Well, that's good. That's very informative information. And I should add, what stuck out in my mind about that particular post of yours was the fact that it didn't appear to me much hesitation on your part to admit the fact that you had ancestors who were slave owners. Did you anticipate? Because when I read through the responses, it was like I saw several of them that echoed kind of like the same sentiment. Oh, yeah, well, that was way back then, and I'm not responsible for my ancestors, or you have to move on. Did you anticipate that it would it would create kind of like a temporary mini controversy that it did when you posted it?
I thought that there was a possibility for that. And I tend to hold with the argument that many of them made that I am not responsible for what my ancestors did.
Mm-hmm.
And by the same token, my acknowledging what they did doesn't put any guilt on me,
mm-hmm.
and it doesn't absolve me of anything.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing really to do with me. A reporting of fact. One of the posters alluded to the argument that we cannot put 21st century ideals or mores on people in the past. And generally speaking, I agree with that. But as I pointed out, I can use the standards of the 1700s and say that these slaveholders were violating the tenets of their own religion.
As Quakers.
Mm-hmm. So I am not imposing my values. I am imposing the values of their neighbors,
mm-hmm.
of their church.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's an entirely different situation.
Yeah, that's understandable. I will say that in my readings, I'm kind of hearing, or I've seen it where said, and I can't really cite specifics having to do with Quakers and slavery, is that sometimes the Quakers, they would use a strategy where they would purchase the slaves from slave owners who were not Quakers in order to set them free. But based on what you were saying, when you said that you had relatives that put it in their will, you're admitting the fact that not all of them set them free. They were passed down. So I commend you.
That's part of what I am looking for with these wills, to see. At this point, what I am finding is an inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not saying what the disposition of that inventory is. It could very well be that in the will it says, and my two Negroes, Bill and Helen, are set free.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It could say that, but
mm-hmm.
I don't have that piece of paper.
Exactly. Yeah.
To tell me
mm-hmm.
that. Tell me that.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the reasons that I had asked you to become a member of this podcast is, like I said, it's not a lot of people who have ancestors who had been slave owners, and these people who are current and involved in the Facebook groups are courageous enough to say that. I hope that anyone who hears this particular podcast episode will rethink their hesitation to bring it up if they have some knowledge. I kind of hope it opens some doors in that area, because it would be helpful to everyone.
Well, and, I claim absolutely no pride of authorship or artisticness or anything to the image that I have attached.
Right. I understand.
And, no, my point being, if other people want to use that image, if they think that's an appropriate thing to do, please take it. Please feel free to use it.
In much the same way that you did.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I took an image to which I added the word slaveholder.
Yes. Okay.
And I specifically looked for, and I went through a whole lot of images.
Mm-hmm.
I specifically looked for something that showed what I thought was ownership, as opposed to being a slave overseer on a southern plantation. There were a lot of images of people beating slaves.
Yes,
and I thought that was not particularly helpful.
Mm-hmm.
That was, in fact, courting controversy that I wasn't trying to do.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I thought that the image I was able to find makes it clear that these are slaves, that they are enslaved people, and that there is a white person that is presumably their owner.
Mm-hmm.
So that there's no question about all that. But that was not necessarily depicting cruelty or anything beyond just the simple fact of ownership.
Mm. Well, I certainly appreciate your participation in this podcast and sharing the information that you shared with us. I hope that in one form or another that you and I remain in contact.
Very good, and I wish you the very best of luck with all of your podcasts.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.